The snow isn't just cold, it's a curtain. A white, silent veil that hides things that shouldn't be seen. It muffles screams and covers tracks, leaving you utterly alone with whatever is hunting you in the blizzard. These aren't just winter ghost stories. These are the chilling accounts of people who looked out into the pristine, beautiful snow and saw something terrible looking back. People who learned the hard way that when the world is buried in white, there is nowhere to run, and no one can hear you scream. For 3 winters, I drove a snowplow for the county, specifically the treacherous mountain route on Highway 88. It was a lonely job, mostly just me, my massive truck named Bertha, and the endless white void ahead. The pay was good because the risk was high. Avalanches, black ice, engine failure miles from civilization. You had to be a certain kind of person to do it. The kind of person who finds comfort in isolation. That changed one night in late January. A storm, the likes of which we hadn't seen in a decade, had descended upon the mountain pass. It was a whiteout, a swirling vortex of ice and wind that reduced visibility to practically zero. My mission was simple. Keep the main artery to the valley clear for emergency vehicles. It was around 2 a.m., deep in the gut of the storm, when my headlights caught something. It wasn't a stalled car or a fallen rock. It was a figure, standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the massive plow screeching and groaning as it slid to a halt just feet from the person. It was a man, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothing, a thin wool coat and trousers, completely inadequate for the blizzard. He wasn't even shivering. He just stood there, his face pale and gaunt, staring at me. I flicked on my external speaker. "Sir, you need to get off the road. It's not safe out here." He didn't move. He just tilted his head, a slow, unnatural motion, and a faint, thin smile spread across his lips. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold snaked down my spine. This was wrong. All of it. I laid on the horn, a deafening blast that should have made any living creature jump. He didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the dense wall of trees to my right. Then, he turned and walked directly into the blizzard, vanishing into the white chaos as if he was never there. My heart was pounding. Was I seeing things? The exhaustion, the hypnotic swirl of snow. It can play tricks on your mind. Shaking. My head. I put the truck in gear and continued my route, trying to forget the phantom on the pass. An hour later, my radio crackled to life. It was dispatch. Plow 1, we've got a report of a stranded vehicle about 5 miles ahead of your current position. A family with 2 kids. Their GPS took them down an old service road. My blood ran cold. The old service road. It was exactly where the man had been pointing. I pushed Bertha as fast as I dared, my mind racing. When I reached the turnoff, I could see the faint glow of a car's hazard lights, nearly swallowed by the snow. The family was terrified but safe. Their car had slid into a ditch, and their cell service was dead. They'd been stranded for hours. As I was helping them into the warmth of my cab, the father looked at me, his face pale. "We are so lucky you found us." We were about to give up hope. "About an hour ago, some guy tapped on our window. Scared the hell out of us." I froze. "A guy? Out here?" "Yeah," the mother chimed in, pulling a blanket tighter around her daughter. "He was dressed so strangely, in old clothes. He didn't say anything. He just pointed. Back towards the main highway." My gaze drifted back to the dark, silent forest. I never told them that the service road they were on had been decommissioned for 20 years. I never told them that the man who had pointed them to safety was the same man who had pointed me to them. And I never told them that when the state troopers checked the area the next day, there was only one set of tracks in the pristine, deep snow leading to and from that car. And they belonged to me. My sister and I thought we'd scored the ultimate New Year's getaway, a secluded A-frame cabin nestled deep in the woods of Vermont. All ours for a week. The pictures online showed a cozy fireplace, snow-covered pines, and a promise of perfect silence. And for the first 2 days, it was exactly that. We skied. We drank hot chocolate. We were completely disconnected from the world. The silence, however, started to change on the third night. It became heavier, more watchful. We were sitting by the fire when we heard it. A single sharp tap on the large glass pane of the A-frame that made up the entire front of the cabin. We both jumped. My sister Jenna laughed it off. Probably just a branch falling. But we both knew it wasn't. It was a clean, distinct sound, like a fingernail on glass. We turned on the porch light, peering out into the swirling snow. Nothing. Just the endless dark woods. We tried to ignore it, but the cozy atmosphere was shattered. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, sounded like a footstep. An hour later, it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate knocks, this time on the back door that led to the kitchen. My heart hammered against my ribs. We were miles from the nearest town. No one should be out here. I grabbed the heaviest fireplace poker I could find, and Jenna got her phone, her fingers hovering over 911. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking. The only answer was the howling wind. We huddled together on the couch for the rest of the night, not sleeping, just listening. The knocking never came again. The next morning, emboldened by the daylight, we decided to investigate. The snow around the cabin was a pristine, undisturbed blanket, nearly a foot deep. There were no footprints, not a single one. Not by the front window, not by the back door, not anywhere. It was impossible. "See?" Jenna said, her relief palpable. It must have been the wind or ice cracking. But I wasn't convinced. The sounds had been too precise. That afternoon, we decided to build a snowman to lighten the mood. As I was rolling a large ball of snow for the base, my hand hit something hard. I brushed the snow away and found a small wooden hatch flush with the ground. It was part of an old, forgotten root cellar. Curiosity got the better of me. We managed to pry it open. The air that rose from the darkness was stale and cold. Using our phone flashlights, we peered inside. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet deep, with damp stone walls. And in the center of the dirt floor was a single, small wooden chair. On the chair sat a worn, leather-bound book. My hands trembled as I reached down and picked it up. It was a diary. The entries were dated from the winter of 1956, written by a woman named Alara, who had lived in the cabin alone. Her entries started off normal, describing the beauty of the snow and the solitude, but they quickly devolved into paranoia. She wrote about a tapping. A constant, maddening tapping on the windows and doors, always at night. She wrote that there were never any footprints. She started to believe something was trapped in the walls or under the floor, trying to get her attention. The final entry, dated January 4th, 1957, was almost illegible, the handwriting frantic and jagged. It read, "It's not in the walls, it's in the silence. It wants to get in." I finally asked it what it wants. It tapped back. It tapped my name. We slammed the cellar hatch shut, We packed our bags in a frantic panic and were out of that cabin in less than 10 minutes. As I locked the door for the last time, I glanced back at the large A-frame window. For a split second, in the reflection, on the glass, I saw a pale face standing behind me, its mouth open in a silent scream. We drove the whole way home without saying a word. The silence in the car heavier and more terrifying than any noise I had ever heard. Working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard is a special kind of lonely. The world shrinks down to the fluorescent hum of the coolers and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers on the window. Most nights, the only company I'd have would be the occasional trucker or a state trooper looking for coffee. But this night was different. The storm was so bad that the highway had been closed. I hadn't seen a car in hours. I was effectively trapped, a tiny island of light in an ocean of raging white. Around 3:30 a.m., I was restocking the coffee station when the motion sensor bell above the door chimed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I looked up to see a man standing just inside the doorway, shaking snow from a thick, dark coat. He was huge, well over 6 feet, with a heavy beard caked in ice. But what struck me was that he hadn't driven up. I would have seen headlights, heard an engine. It was as if he'd just materialized out of the storm. "Nasty night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He just stared at me with dark, empty eyes. He walked slowly through the aisles, his heavy boots silent on the linoleum floor. He didn't pick anything up. He just looked, his head turning with a slow, deliberate movement. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heart thumping. He made his way to the back of the store near the coolers, and stood there, facing the glass doors, his back to me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I was starting to think I should call someone, but who? The line was probably dead and the cops couldn't get here anyway. I decided to act normal. "Find everything you're looking for?" I called out. He turned his head slowly, so only his profile was visible in the reflection of the cooler door. "Just waiting," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Waiting for what?" I asked, my hand inching towards the panic button under the counter. He turned fully to face me, and a slow, unnerving smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes, for the lights to go out. And at that exact moment, with a sound like a giant sigh, the entire station plunged into absolute darkness. The generators had failed. The fluorescent buzz was replaced by a terrifying total silence, broken only by the shriek of the wind outside. I couldn't see anything, not the counter, not my own hand in front of my face, but I could hear him. I could hear the soft, deliberate sound of his boots as he started walking towards me in the pitch black. I scrambled backwards, fumbling for the heavy mag light I kept under the counter. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and I clicked it on, swinging the beam of light wildly around the store. He was gone. The store was completely empty. The front door was closed, a fine dusting of snow undisturbed on the mat in front of it. I stood there, bathed in the single beam of light, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The power was out for 4 hours. 4 hours I spent huddled behind the counter, my maglite beam fixed on the front door, listening to the storm rage, and praying that I wouldn't hear the chime of the bell again. The next morning, when the road crew finally cleared the highway, the sheriff came by to check on me. I told him what happened. He listened patiently, then walked outside. He came back in a few minutes later, his face grim. He told me they'd found a semi-truck jackknifed about a mile down the road. It had happened hours ago, right when the storm got bad. The driver had been thrown from the cab. They found his body in a snowdrift not 50 yards from my gas station. The sheriff said he'd frozen to death. He was a big man, with a thick, dark beard. Being a search and rescue volunteer in the Rocky Mountains means you see things. You see the raw power of nature, and you see the tragic consequences of underestimating it. Most of the time, we're looking for lost hikers or stranded skiers, but in the winter of 2018, we were looking for a ghost. A small plane had gone down somewhere in the Flat Tops Wilderness, a vast, brutal expanse of snow and ice. The emergency locator beacon had given us a general area, but the blizzard that followed the crash had buried everything under 10 feet of fresh powder. For a week, we searched. Helicopters saw nothing but an endless sea of white. Our ground teams on snowmobiles and skis found no wreckage, no debris, no sign of the pilot. It was like the plane and the man flying it had simply vanished from the face of the earth. We were about to call off the search, presuming it was a recovery mission for the spring thaw, when we got a bizarre call. A lone ice fisherman on a remote lake, miles from the search area, had seen something. He said a man had walked out of the woods, right onto the frozen lake. He described the man as wearing a pilot's uniform, but it was pristine, not a tear or a speck of dirt on it. The fisherman had called out to him, but the man didn't seem to hear. He just walked to the center of the lake, lay down on the ice and stared up at the sky. Then, the fisherman said, the man just faded. He became translucent, and then disappeared completely. We thought the old man was crazy, but we were desperate. We sent a team, including me, to the lake. The ice was thick and solid, the snow on top of it smooth and unmarked. There were no tracks, except for one set, a single trail of footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the exact center of the lake. But there were no footprints leading away. We followed them, a strange sense of dread growing with every step. In the middle of the lake, where the fisherman said the man had vanished, the footprints just stopped. It was as if the person who made them had been plucked straight up into the sky. As we stood there, utterly bewildered, our radio operator's voice crackled in our headsets, strained with disbelief. I don't know how to explain this. We just got a signal, a faint one, from the emergency locator. It's not from the mountains. It's coming from right underneath you. We stared down at the solid ice. It was impossible. The beacon was built into the plane's fuselage. There was no way it could be here. One of our team members had a portable sonar device. We aimed it at the ice. The screen flickered to life, showing the depth of the lake. It was over 300 feet deep, and at the very bottom, a shape. The unmistakable outline of a small aircraft. We never recovered the plane or the pilot. The lake was too deep, the conditions too dangerous. But the official report doesn't mention the strangest part. It doesn't mention the footprints that led to nowhere, and it doesn't mention what I saw as we were leaving. As I glanced back at the center of the lake, for just a moment, I saw a dark shape under the ice. A shape that looked like a man, his arms outstretched, as if he were floating up towards us from the crushing, dark depths. My grandfather passed away in November, leaving me his old house on the coast of Maine. It was a place full of childhood memories, but it was also isolated, sitting on a rocky cliff overlooking the angry Atlantic. I decided to spend the Christmas holiday there alone, to sort through his things and say a proper goodbye. The first big snowstorm of the season hit on Christmas Eve. The wind howled like a banshee, and waves crashed against the cliffs below, sending salty spray freezing against the window panes. I was in the attic looking through old photo albums when I heard a bell. It was a faint tinkling sound, almost lost in the storm. I paused listening. It came again. It was the small brass bell my grandfather had hung on the front door. He said its ring was so distinct he could tell if it was the wind or a person. This was not the wind. I crept downstairs, my heart thumping. Who could possibly be out in this storm? I looked through the peephole. A figure stood on my porch, almost completely obscured by the driving snow. They were wearing a heavy, old-fashioned yellow rain slicker, the kind fishermen used to wear. Their head was bowed, so I couldn't see their face. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Hello, can I help you?" The figure didn't look up. A gloved hand rose and offered me a small burlap sack. It was dripping with seawater. "A gift!" A voice rasped, rough and gurgling, like stones being dragged across the seabed. "For the lonely." Before I could respond, the figure turned and walked away from the porch, disappearing into the white fury of the storm. They didn't walk towards the road. They walked straight towards the edge of the cliff. Shaken, I closed and bolted the door. The burlap sack was still on the porch. Against my better judgment, I brought it inside. It was cold and damp, and it smelled of salt and something else. Something like decay. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were dozens of objects, all worn smooth by the ocean. Sea glass, strange shells I'd never seen before, and a small silver locket. I opened the locket. On one side was a faded black and white photo of a young woman with sad eyes. On the other side, a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. I carefully unfolded it. It was a newspaper clipping, the date almost completely worn away. The headline read, "Local woman lost to the sea in winter gale." I dropped the locket as if it were burning. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the fire, listening to the storm and the tinkling of the bell on the door, which rang periodically, even when the wind died down. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world was covered in a thick, beautiful blanket of snow. I went outside, needing to clear my head. The burlap sack was gone from the porch. I walked to the edge of the cliff where the figure had disappeared. The snow there was completely untouched. There were no footprints. But as I looked down at the churning gray water below, I saw something. A flash of yellow, deep beneath the waves, moving in the dark currents. A yellow slicker, dancing in the deep, forever waiting for the next lonely soul to visit on a stormy Christmas Eve. Last winter, I took a job as a caretaker for a remote mountain lodge that closed during the off-season. My only duty was to live there, make sure the pipes didn't freeze, and keep the snow from collapsing the roof. My closest neighbor was 20 miles away. I was completely, utterly alone, and I loved it. For the first month, the silence was a comfort. But as the snow piled higher, burying the lodge up to its second-story windows, the silence started to feel different. It felt heavy, occupied. I started hearing things, faint whispers that seemed to ride on the wind, the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor in the empty rooms above me. I told myself it was just the old building settling under the weight of the snow. One night I was awakened by a sound that I couldn't explain away. It was music, a tinny, off-key melody from an old-timey piano, and it was coming from the lodge's grand ballroom, a massive, empty room that had been locked since I arrived. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The door to the ballroom was at the end of a long, dark hallway. As I got closer, the music grew louder. I could hear it clearly now, a sad, disjointed waltz. I reached the door. It was still locked, the heavy deadbolt firmly in place, but the music was clearly coming from inside. I pressed my ear against the cold wood. The piano music stopped abruptly, and then a woman's voice, whispering right from the other side of the door. "I know you're out there. Come and dance with me." I stumbled back, my blood turning to ice. I ran back to my small apartment in the lodge and barricaded the door. The music didn't start again, but the whispering did. It followed me everywhere. I'd hear it from the heating vents, from the chimney, from the other end of a dead phone line. It was always her voice, begging me to let her in, to dance with her. I was on the brink of madness. I hadn't slept in days. I was packing my things, ready to abandon the job and hike the 20 miles to town, when I found the old guest logs in the main office. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning the names from decades past. And then I saw it. An entry from the winter of 1923. It detailed a massive blizzard that had trapped the guests in the lodge for weeks. The last page of the entry was a frantic scrawl from the manager. It described how a young woman, a guest named Lillian, had lost her mind from the isolation. She had played the piano in the ballroom day and night, until one evening, she had simply walked out into the blizzard, seeking a dance partner. They never found her body. As I read the last line, I heard a soft scratching sound. It was coming from the window behind me. I turned slowly. my flashlight beam shaking. On the other side of the glass, caked in snow and ice, was a face, a woman's face. Her skin blue with cold, her eyes wide and pleading. Her frozen fingers were scratching at the pane, leaving long trails in the frost. And her lips, cracked and pale, were moving, forming a single silent word. Dance! Winter hides many secrets. Have you ever seen something in the snow that you couldn't explain? Share your own chilling encounters in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you're never left alone in the dark, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stay safe and don't listen to the voices in the blizzard.